going to talk about freehand stenciling with permanent markers, and also going to talk about ink poisoning, fact or myth. Then I'm going to talk about petroleum jelly, how to use it correctly, and how to set up your station easily with it. And that includes A&D ointment also. And I'm going to show you easy way to shave the skin, the area that you're going to be working with, and how to do that correctly also. And I'm going to show you how to hand poke tattoos. So people have moved away from using petroleum jelly or A&D ointment. There's several products out there now that they're selling to replace these. Some of the things I've heard are that the petroleum jelly will break down your gloves, and that it's also not good for your skin, or that it affects the colors of your tattoo. And I haven't researched this as much as I'd like to, but eventually I will, and I will get back to you guys on that, on how I feel about that. But in the meantime, I use petroleum jelly, but not as much on the skin, just because I don't like how slimy it is, and I use it mostly for my setup. And I will use the A&D ointment on the skin, and I'll show you why I do that. So first of all, let me tell you what not to do. Do not take your fingers, stick them in here, and wipe them all over the place. That's not a good way to set up your station or to get the petroleum jelly. You want to use a tongue depressor or a popsicle stick, and you can get these in the craft section at Walmart, craft store, any kind of popsicle stick. These are the fatter ones, and that way you're not contaminating your supply of petroleum jelly here. You see, I keep those in a container so that they don't get dirty. So you're gonna get some petroleum jelly. I like to get a glob of it on the end there, and then I set it down on my paper towels, and I like to drag it across my paper towels in a line. And as you do that, you can see that you start to get two lines of petroleum jelly. You can kind of sculpt it yourself with this popsicle stick here. So then once you have two lines of the petroleum jelly, you can take your color cups and just set them up in two rows. And you can do this if you have several rows of color cups. You can do this several different times, but I actually just did this many color cups to show you guys. I'm not going to use all of these for what I'm doing today. But another thing you can do is get your A&D ointment and just run a line and you can stick your color cups in that, but A&D ointment tends to be a little more expensive than petroleum jelly. Not much. It's still pretty cheap, but if you want to save money, you can use the petroleum jelly. Now, so that's all I use the petroleum jelly for, is just to set up my color cups, keep them from moving around while I'm tattooing. And I use the A&D ointment on the skin because it's thinner, and I'll show you why that's important. So let me show you a problem with using too much ointment while you're tattooing. Okay, here's a 5-round liner, and I have some black ink. I have Star Bright Turbo Black and Tens True Black. I'm going to dip my needle in the color cup. You can see the Turbo Black Star Bright tends to be a little wet, so there's no ink even sticking to this needle. So I'm going to use a little thicker ink. There we go, in Tens True Black. But watch what happens when I put the needle in the Vaseline. Okay, you see how the ink is no longer on the needle. It is just sitting on top of the Vaseline. Show you one more time here. See how that ink just beads off the needle? So the Vaseline will actually prevent the ink from going into the skin if you use too much of it. And if you get Vaseline on your needle's probably not going to hold ink as well. So this is why I don't like to use a lot of ointment when I'm tattooing. If I could, I would tattoo dry, but that's not very comfortable. You run into issues. So okay, now we are moving on to shaving, and I just have a cheap disposable razor here and some stencil stuff. This is the solution I mixed of hand sanitizer, deodorant, and some aloe vera. Now, you can use green soap to shave, but this is a little thicker, a little more like shaving cream, so it'll stick to the skin. So I actually prefer to use this when I shave. Gives it a little more protection on your skin from the razor. Now never touch the top of this and pour it out. You always want to keep some distance between the paper towel and pour this small amount, because it goes a long way, into your paper towel. And then you can put this on the area and shape it. So when you shave, you don't want to just shave right where you're going to tattoo. You want to get the surrounding area also. That way you don't get any kind of hair or other things in the way there. So shave a good area around it, and sometimes when I'm tattooing I might end up going bigger or adding to a piece. So if you shave around it, you don't have to come back and shave in the middle of a tattoo. You've already shaved that area. So if you want to go a little bigger, add a little embellishment or background, that area is already ready to go. Okay, moving on to permanent markers and stencils. Now, they say that petroleum jelly will eat away at your gloves, possibly put you at risk of getting the client's fluids on you. You can see I've already changed out one pair of gloves. These ones are getting thrown away. I typically don't wear the same pair of gloves through the entire tattoo if it's a big enough tattoo. So I switch my gloves out, and what I'll do is I'll actually put a couple of pairs out on the table so that I don't have to go digging for some more or ask for someone to give me some and contaminate all of my gloves. So you don't want to use one set of Sharpie markers on a bunch of people. You really ideally want to use a marker one time on a person and then get rid of it. I mean, if the person wants to keep the markers, you can give it to the person. They can have them. You know, Sharpie markers tend to be a little more expensive. So what you'll see people do is use some disposable pins, use them one time and just throw them away. Because if you're touching the client and you're touching these things, you're getting everything on this that was on that client's skin. And so you use that on one client and then go use it on another client, you're cross-contaminating, you're doing bad things. So one time use only, give it to the person or throw it away. That's the safest way to do that. So some people worry about ink poisoning because growing up your parents always told you don't draw on yourself because you're going to get ink poisoning. And the parents tell their kids that because they don't want their kids to draw on themselves. But very rarely, if ever, would you have ink poisoning from drawing on yourself. You could have some kind of reaction to the ink in different people, and if that reaction, if you see that reaction, you just immediately stop using the markers on them and clean the area off and just don't use these on that person. But for most people, it's safe to draw on them with Sharpie markers. You have to, in order to get ink poisoning, you have to ingest large amounts of ink or absorb large amounts of ink into your body. And that typically happens with printing ink. And this is water-soluble printing ink, so I could probably eat these and not have any problems. I might feel sick, but the ink they're talking about is the really nasty stuff full of chemicals that comes in paint cans, the size of a 5-gallon paint can, and it's for printing, for lithography, for a printing press. If you expose yourself to that all the time, large amounts of that, that's where you would typically get ink poisoning from. So you want to start off with lighter colors first. Now I have yellow and orange and red. Then your darker colors would be blue, purple, black. Now yellow is not going to show up very well on the skin, but if you want to use it, go ahead and you just freehand your design on the skin. Now I already have a design in mind, so you can see I've already started working on it. So I would just draw that on there with the lighter markers first, just to get an idea of what I want. And then I would move to a darker marker and start to put in the details. As I move to the darker colors, I want to start cleaning it up and really getting the design I want in there, making it nice and crisp. And you can see if I started with darker markers first, I would not be able to come back in and draw over them. So I just move in a progression from light to dark until I really get all of my design elements in there. And you can see as it starts to get darker, I want to put in finer lines. But for the beginning, for the base, I don't have to be as careful because you're not going to see much of that. You're just going to see the darker colors on top.